So the first piece that we're going to cover today, and just bear with me because I do need to do the khutbah al-hajjah, which I just realized I did not put it in my presentation. So in alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna muhammadan abduhu rasuluh. Indeed, all the praise is due to Allah. We seek Allah's help and forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evil in our souls and bad deeds. Whom Allah guides will never be led astray, and whoever Allah leaves astray, no one can guide. I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah, the one who has no partners, and I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ﷺ is Allah's final servant and messenger. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who have believed in Allah, fear Allah as Allah alone should be feared, and do not die except as Muslims in submission to Allah. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. O people, be dutiful to your Lord who created you from one soul and created from it its mate and dispersed from both many men and women. And fear Allah through whom you demand mutual rights and revere the wombs that bore you. Indeed, Allah is ever over you, a-Raqib, an observer. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. O you who have believed in and fear Allah, speak words of appropriate justice. Allah will then amend for you your deeds and forgive your sins. And whoever obeys Allah and Allah's messenger has attained the most excellent attainment. Amma ba'd. So inshallah, we turn to the continuation of the hadith, looking at the hadith addressing purification after one has had contact with the dog. Okay. And that is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, if a dog licks the vessel of any one of you, let them throw it away, whatever was in it, and wash it 7 times. And this is in the Sahih of Muslim. Okay. The agitators of a modern day washing machine would accomplish this within a minute. And this is why it is so vitally important that we always look at modern day context as well as the context in which it was revealed. So this hadith addresses the concept of ritual purity, where contact with the dog's saliva requires specific cleaning practices. So one would have to either wash themselves with soap and water, make their ablution again, not wear any clothes that had the dog's saliva on it. And so I wanted to go in today and talk about the scientific findings that can explain why dog saliva might be considered a potential health risk, particularly in certain circumstances. And so one of the things I wanted to say is that I know that this third class, and I'm not sure I'll get through the whole thing today, but these 3 or 4 classes that we're doing on tasweer, it's not information that might actually increase your iman, but it is very educational information that I feel is essential for us to understand. There are a lot of questions about this, and it also is a great educational lesson on Islamic jurisprudence and how the scholars examine Quran and Sunnah, Ijma'a, scholarly census, and these kind of ideas. So let's talk about, with that in mind, specific findings as to why dog saliva might be considered a potential risk. And firstly, we'll talk about bacteria in dog saliva. So we're blessed today to have Dr. I.S.L.A., who, may Allah forgive me if I misintroduce her, but is a veterinarian who, I believe, if I remember correctly, I'll ask you to correct me at the end of the class, specializes in pathology, and I believe specific to animals. So she will be able to correct any terms, inshallah, and forgive me if I put you on the spot, Dr. I.S.L.A. Some of these terms are very difficult for me to pronounce. So let's talk about oral microbiome. Dog saliva contains a complex mixture of bacteria. While many of these bacteria are harmless to dogs, some can be pathogenic to humans. For example, Capnocytophaccanemorsus is a bacterium commonly found in dogs' mouths that can, in rare cases, cause severe infection in humans, especially in those with weakened immune systems. Zoonotic infections, dog saliva can potentially transmit zoonotic or zoonotic, I think it is, pathogens, diseases that can be transferred from animals to humans. Common examples include E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. While these are typically associated with gastrointestinal symptoms, they can sometimes be severe, especially in vulnerable populations. Parasites. Dogs can carry parasites. Roundworms are an example of this, and I think it's called Toxicaricanis in the proper form, which can be transmitted to humans through dog saliva or contaminated surfaces. This can lead to a condition known as toxicariasis, which can cause serious health problems in humans, especially in children. Allergies. Some people are allergic to proteins found in dog saliva. The dander on dog's hair. When a dog licks them, this can lead to allergic reactions ranging from mild skin irritations to more severe respiratory issues in extremely sensitive individuals. So as you know, I always try to connect the Quran, the Sunnah, and science together, world application, daily applications for us. Wound healing concerns, a fourth issue. While there is a widespread belief that dog saliva has healing properties due to enzymes like lysozyme, I think it's called, and lactoferrin, the risk of infections from harmful bacteria generally outweighs these potential benefits. When a dog licks a wound, there is a possibility of introducing bacteria that could lead to infection, especially in deep and open wounds. Again, I'm sharing this scientifically. In the modern world, we have very little problems with this. And I would like anyone online that has greater information about this at the end of the class to educate me and share with me anything that I have shared that you think might ought to be corrected. Number 5 is hygiene concerns. Dog saliva can quickly transfer to household surfaces, food, and human hands, potentially spreading bacteria and other pathogens. This can pose a health risk in specific contexts, particularly regarding hygiene. Let's talk about the religious context in review. In Islamic jurisprudence, impurity, najasa, is not solely based on what is harmful, but also on ritual cleanliness, tahara. Dog saliva is considered ritually impure, and Muslims are instructed to wash themselves and their utensils if they encounter it, particularly by following a specific method that includes cleaning the container 7 times or washing the clothes 7 times. And also how in one hadith it can be done similar to tayammum, done with earth. So this practice could be seen as a precautionary measure to ensure cleanliness and prevent potential health risks, though the religious reasoning goes beyond the purely scientific. Also, number 5, which was something that I had never remembered seeing in my studies, there's hadith on the prohibition of selling dogs. Now, remember, keep in mind, we're talking about jurisprudence that was made 1446 years ago when we had a huge uh, rabies problem, and we had packs of very destructive feral dogs running around. So, narrated by Abu Masood al-Ansari, radiallahu, the Messenger of Allah prohibited the selling of a dog, the earnings of a prostitute, and the payment given to a soothsayer. And this goes back, of course, to our original classes on Tawheed and how going to a soothsayer is haram. This hadith prohibits selling dogs, which some scholars understand as emphasizing the importance of keeping dogs only for necessary reasons rather than for commercial profit. So let's look at the review in terms of context and interpretation, utility and balance. Despite these ahadith, many recognize dogs' utility, especially for hunting, guarding, and shepherding, and those intended for handicapped folks trained for that purpose. The negative connotations are often associated with concerns about ritual purity or the unnecessary keeping of dogs without a specific purpose. Mercy to animals. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized kindness to animals, including dogs. And hopefully you will remember the hadith about the reward for giving water to a thirsty dog and the prohibitions against animal cruelty. These ahadith must be understood in the broader context of Islamic jurisprudence, where the benefits and harms are weighed carefully and where kindness and utility are central considerations in the treatments of animals. If we assume that the Prophet ﷺ condemned dogs, were there local conditions, and again, this comes back to what we talked about, that made them prohibited, such as rabies or an overpopulation of feral dogs? The dogs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ were vastly different from the ones we have in the Western world that are fluffy, trained, and friendly. The dogs in Arabia at the time of the Prophet ﷺ were very vicious and would sometimes attack humans in packs. The disease among dogs were very widespread. People 1400 years ago did not have the medicine to cure the deadly diseases some of the dogs may have carried. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ makes statements, orders things, and is reported in authentic hadith books, they should not be seen separately, but rather holistically to get a better historical understanding. And this is the educational piece that I think is so vitally important. Similar to how we looked at the prayer of a traveler, we went into all the depths of the ahadith and the Quranic verses and then demonstrated the practical application. So what we found is that there is a big gap between the Quran and the ahadith's strong condemnation of dogs. A more comprehensive gap and overwhelming discrepancy exists between ahadith themselves, from condemning dogs to killing either only black dogs or all dogs, to milder condemnations such as cleaning the pot that the dog licked 7 times. As stressed here, the last condition of cleanliness seems promising in this debate. In the olden Arabian context and Muslim cultures where dogs were stray and wild, non-domesticated, wandering into all kinds of filth, getting into the gutters and all kinds of things, they would be utterly infectious and even deadly for human lives because of rabies, again, no longer a problem for the most part in the world today. There are some places in the world that it's still a problem, like India, for example. Dogs uncared for, unloved, and homeless can be frightening. In this case, they may become dirty, so angels would not want to be around them. So finally, we return to taswir from another angle today. And this is really, I think, again, very educational and very beneficial for us to look at subjects from all kinds of angles, to think outside of the box. So the Yulance Posten Mohammed cartoon controversy, which began after the Danish newspaper Jyllands Posten published 12 editorial cartoons on the 30th of September in 2005. But it quickly became apparent that the issue at hand expanded far deeper. So I wanted so badly to share my screen with you and show you these images. But because of the controversial, these cartoons have been lumped together in such a small picture that I didn't have the capacity to expand each one of them so that you could see them. So I would encourage you to Google, and I'll spell it for you, Jyllands, pronounced Yulons, Posten, Mohammed cartoons. And the author of them, or the artist, was Kurt Westergaard. You can also look his name up, Kurt Westergaard's 12 cartoons. So this matter of these cartoons, based on taswir, knowing that we as Muslims do not draw images of animate articles, is vital to understand. The article of these cartoons touched the hearts and minds of many Muslims around the world, raising significant questions about pictures, the nature of freedom, expression, and mutual respect. It is a privilege to teach about taswir. It is a privilege for me to be able to break this down and hopefully to give you insight on many other subjects that fit into the realm of taswir, picture making versus photography. So today I want to draw on this material to examine the emotional and cultural impact of defamatory portrayals of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, such as these controversial cartoons, in the context of global values like freedom of speech and the right to opinion and expression. So again, we're going to just quickly talk about the Islamic perspective of taswir. In Islamic teachings, there is strong tradition of taswir, or anachronism, which discourages the depiction of living beings, particularly prophets and other sacred figures. The tradition has its roots in a desire to protect the oneness of Allah and to prevent any form of idolatry or association of partners with Allah Azza wa Jal. The Quran and Ahadith emphasize that Allah is the sole creator, and thus humans should not attempt to replicate his creation. Many Ahadith warn against making images of beings with souls. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, and I remind you of class 1, those who make these images will be punished on the day of resurrection, and it will be said to them, bring to life what you think you have created. Such teachings reflect the seriousness with which Islamic tradition treats visual representations, especially sacred figures. For a moment, let's ponder and reflect on the Muslim emotional response to defamatory depictions. Given this background, it is easier to understand why the defamatory cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ published in this newspaper and other outlets provoked such strong response among Muslims worldwide. For Muslims, the Prophet is not just a historical figure, he is the exemplar of virtue and the final messenger, who brought Islam's divine message to humanity. The reverence for him is deep, encompassing love, respect, and a commitment to follow his teachings. The astute believer loves Allah and the messenger more than they love themselves. So this helps, inshallah, to put it in context. To depict the Prophet ﷺ in a derogatory, blasphemous way is not only seen as disrespecting the individual, but as an affront to the entire Islamic faith. The cartoons were not just offensive images, they were perceived as a deliberate attempt to provoke and insult, especially at a time when the relationship between Muslim majority countries and the West was already strained. Think about the era, 2005. The outrage that followed was not solely about the images themselves, but about what they symbolized, a broader disregard for Muslim beliefs and values. And so when we talk about freedom of expression, we have to pause a minute and look at the world's point of view so that we can compare it in that context. On the other hand, the controversial surrounding the cartoons highlights the world's commitment to freedom of speech and expression. In many democratic societies, freedom of expression is considered a cornerstone of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, particularly Article 19, states that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, including the ability to share ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. From this perspective, the publication of the cartoons was defended as an exercise of this fundamental right, even if the content was controversial and offensive. Supporters of unrestricted freedom of expression argued that if society begins to censor ideas or images to avoid offending certain groups, it sets a precedent for curtailing freedoms in other areas. So you can understand how people fighting for freedom of speech and expression are dealing with this worldly untruth ideology, and it affects our context. They see the unrestricted exchange of ideas as vital to a free and open society, even if it's offensive. Navigating the intersection of freedom and respect is so important. Freedom of expression does not exist in a vacuum. It must be balanced with societal or social responsibility and respect for cultural and religious activities, sensitivities. Just because one has the right to say or publish something does not mean it is always wise or morally justified. For example, we all know that it is against the law. You have freedom of speech, but it is against the law, and you will be arrested if you were to stand up in a theater and yell, "There's a fire in the place." Public safety. I deem by Allah that hikmah, wisdom, sets the stage where the challenge is to understand where to draw the line between the right to speak freely and the need to respect others' deeply held beliefs. The publication of the cartoons, for example, was about exercising freedom of speech and expression and testing its boundaries. While some argue that it was a stand against self-censorship, it can also be seen as an unnecessary provocation, especially when the publishers knew that such depictions would deeply hurt a sizable population of the world. It raises the question, should freedom of expression include the right to offend? Or is there a point where responsible expression should be taking precedence above the absolute freedom to say anything that one's nafs would like to say? And of course, this leads us to look at the broader context of censorship and rights. For many Muslims, the outrage was not just about the cartoons themselves, but about a broader context of perceived double standards and how distinct groups' rights are respected. In some countries, there are laws that prohibit Holocaust denial or hate speech. And even in our own country, there is a huge move to try to pass laws that we cannot discuss the Israeli Palestinian conflict. And now, if you do it, you're considered anti Semitic. This is an example, for example. So we have to recognize the harm that some expressions can cause. Yet, when it comes to matters concerning Islam, there seems to be a different standard, leading many Muslims to feel that their faith is not afforded the same level of protection or respect. And this is the reality of the modern world in which we live in. And it has a lot to do with the Islamophobia industry that we've talked about. At the same time, the question of censorship arises. In a democratic society where the freedom to criticize religious and political authorities is valued, imposing restrictions on speech can be seen as a slippery slope toward authoritarianism. Herein lies the tension. How can societies ensure that the rights of free speech do not become a weapon used to demean or marginalize religious communities? And it amazes me because as a chaplain that spent 29 years in institutionalized chaplaincy, the federal policy called RFRA, the least restrictive religious practices, were required by law to be given to those who were incarcerated in our country. As a result, I had 27 faith groups: Wiccans, Asatru, Onists, Santeria, Rastafarian. So all of these many religions that have very, very non-theocentric ideologies, non-God oriented, many of them, have to be part of this discussion. So often we caught up only thinking about the monotheistic faiths or the so-called monotheistic faiths. We get mixed up between ecumenical, which is usually only among Christians, versus interfaith. And now the world is talking about people of no faith and that they should be included in these groups. So there's a big call out there for mutual understanding and dialogue. So as we examine these complexities, it becomes clear that there is no simple answer here. What we need is a commitment to dialogue, mutual understanding, and empathy. While Muslims have every right to express their dismay at depictions that they find deeply offensive, this response should also be constructive, with beautiful words and eloquent speech, aimed at educating others about why such depictions are hurtful rather than resorting to violence and intimidation. There were riots and major things if you study this. Again, I have tried to condense this class, and yet I see that there's such a need for me to have found a way to show you these cartoons and to show you what each of them depicted. So those who champion freedom of expression so need to recognize that with freedom comes responsibility. And I often think about this in the context of 16-year-olds being allowed to drive in this country. Is a 16-year-old with an undeveloped amygdala truly qualified to get behind a vehicle that weighs probably at least 6,000 pounds without knowing the responsibility of driving that vehicle? The ability to speak freely should be used to foster dialogue, challenge injustices, and promote greater understanding rather than to provoke or insult for the sake of controversy. True freedom is found not just in what we have the right to say, but in how we choose to use that right to build a better and more inclusive world. Moving forward, I deem by Allah that what we're really being called to do is find common ground. In navigating these tensions, both Muslim and non-Muslims can find common ground. It is possible to uphold the principles of free speech while respecting the diversity of cultural and religious values that shape our world. Of course, that's my call to people. We can create spaces where different viewpoints are heard, sacred values are respected, and disagreements do not descend into hostility. And I realize how this class sounds like a commentary, but it is so important for us to really think deeply about these things. We can't just pull out a hadith and make a general consensus based on a cultural ruling. Let us remember the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that the strong person is not the one who is good at wrestling, but the strong person is the one who controls themselves when they are angry. This is a call to channel our emotions toward constructive action, to seek understanding rather than division. In conclusion, when we look at freedom and responsibility, I look at them and see them as partners. Freedom of respect, freedom of speech, and respect for religious beliefs should not be seen as mutually exclusive, but as partners guiding us toward a harmonious society. Everything in Islam is about building a harmonious society, being good to our neighbors near and far. The cartoon controversy may have exposed deep divisions, but it also offers an opportunity to reflect on how we can navigate our differences in ways that uphold human dignity. As we discuss these issues, let us strive to move beyond polarizing debates and toward a future where freedom and responsibility coexist, where the rights of individuals are balanced with the needs of the community, and where our diverse perspectives become a source of strength rather than division. This subject touches upon the delicate intersection of faith, freedom, modern society, and taswir. The Yulance Poston Mohammedan cartoon controversy was an event that sparked discussions far beyond the borders of Denmark and taswir, and it resonates with people of different faiths and backgrounds. At its heart, the crisis highlighted competing values, freedom of speech on one side and respect for religious beliefs on the other. It raised fundamental questions about what it means to live in a multicultural society where people of diverse faiths and worldviews must share public space. So again, the roots of the issue are about freedom of expression. Let us begin with the value of freedom of expression. Again, this principle cherished in many democratic societies and enshrined in Article 19, again, that affirms the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Again, this case is more than just a matter of legal rights. It's about social responsibility. Unlike Christianity, which has a long history of religious art, Islamic teachings have emphasized anachronism, avoiding images of living beings, especially prophets. This tradition arose to protect the purity of monotheism and to prevent any form of idolatry. So we have to ask the question, or other people might ask, why are depictions of the Prophet ﷺ so sensitive? Islamic and iconism is rooted in the belief that Allah is the sole creator of life and that no human should attempt to replicate this divine act. This is why classical Islamic art is characterized by Islamic geometric patterns, calligraphy, um, arabesque, rather than portraits or sculptures. The prohibition on depictions does not restrict artistic expression for its own sake, but rather upholds a fundamental theological principle that God is incomparable and transcendent. For Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ is the final messenger of God, the one who brought the divine revelation of the Quran to humanity. Depicting him is not merely seen as disrespectful, it is viewed as an attempt to diminish the sanctity of his role. Therefore, when the cartoonist Kurt Westergaard depicted him in a derogatory and offensive manner, it struck at the core of Muslim identity and reverence. And then there was the global reaction that went from outrage to dialogue. The global reaction to the cartoons was swift and intense. Protests erupted across the Muslim world, some escalating into violence, resulting in tragic loss of life and attacks on diplomatic missions. This raised an important question. Why such an extreme response? At the time, relations between Muslim majority countries and the West are already strained due to events like the 9/11 attacks and military invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq. For many Muslims, the cartoons were not seen in isolation, but as part of a broader pattern of perceived disrespect and aggression toward Islam. In Denmark, the controversy also revealed tensions within Danish society about the place of Muslims and the nature of Danish identity. Were Muslims to be considered legitimate citizens who could shape the country's cultural norms, or were they expected to conform entirely to existing values, including unrestricted freedom of speech? For some in Denmark, the controversy was about reaffirming secular values, while for many Muslims, it was about demanding recognition and respect. Islam is about al-mizan, the balance. So my beloved brothers and sisters, whenever you approach anything in Islam, you must approach it with a balanced approach. You must always look at all sides of the picture. Don't just pull up something that someone vomited out to you and say, this is Islam. This is why we need scholars. And again, I want you to understand, I am at most a K through 3 teacher. I am only touching the surface of this, but I am trying to teach you how you must approach things in order to be an enlightened Muslim and in order to emulate the kindness and the intellect of our beloved Prophet ﷺ. That brings us to the looking or the examination of the role of religious sensitivity in a pluralistic society. One of the most critical lessons from the cartoon controversy is the importance of understanding religious sensitivities in a pluralistic society. Words and images carry weight. When used to provoke or demean, they cause a lot of harm. We must ask ourselves, what is the purpose of our speech? For we will have to give account for every single word that we say. It is to foster dialogue and understand. That's what it's about. But for many, it is to provoke and alienate. That's not what the Prophet ﷺ enjoined us to do. And here again, I'm reminded of a well-known saying from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the best among you are those who have the best manners and characteristics. So when we meet a conflict, we do not return good, evil for evil. We return good for evil. We take the lemons of these controversies and we beautifully go and teach the people about this. Had we done this, lives could have been saved. Respect is not about limiting freedom, but about using freedom wisely to promote harmony and mutual understanding. And that takes us for a moment to the need to look at a personal reflection, art, and respect. And so I would like to share a personal perspective that may help bridge this gap. In the Islamic tradition, art has always expressed beauty, spirituality, and divine truth without resorting to imagery that could be considered idolatrous. We have some of the most beautiful and respected artistry in the world, architecture. The intricate patterns and calligraphy in the masajids are not just decorative. They actually reflect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite nature. And this, when we talk about the inner dimensions of Islam, so often we go into the masjid and we say, oh, isn't that beautiful? But we don't see how it's not just the beauty of looking at it. It is that infinite nature of Allah that is being displayed, materialized, and realized for us that this Quran that's on these walls in calligraphy have never been changed. It's a miracle. When we produce art, the creator inspires us, but we're not the creators. We're the creature that expressed ourselves with the creations of Allah. We work with materials, ideas, and life already gifted to us by the divine. This belief does not contradict freedom of expression, but it does remind us that with freedom comes the need for thoughtfulness. Just because we have the right to say something does not mean it is right to say it. This is not about censorship. It is about choosing to use our rights to uplift and connect rather than divide us. And of course, this leads us into moving beyond the controversy into a path of dialogue. We cannot go back and undo the events surrounding this controversy, but we can choose how we move forward. We can decide whether this controversy remains a sore point in our history or catalyzes deeper intellectual understanding. Muslims must engage in these conversations not just to express their outrage, but to educate others about why such depictions are so profoundly hurtful. It's about expressing unmet need, not anger. At the same time, non-Muslims can take steps to learn more about the diversity of Islamic traditions and the values that shape them. When both sides try to understand each other, we move from a place of conflict to a place of mutual respect. And in terms of this part of the class, thoughts, freedom, and responsibility. Freedom of expression and religious sensitivity are not mutually exclusive. They are complementary values that must be balanced thoughtfully. Just as the Quran teaches that there shall be no compulsion in religion, we should aim for a world where differences in belief and opinions are respected rather than imposed. Today, if you disagree with someone, they defriend you. If you disagree with someone, they don't speak to you. When we acknowledge that we live in a world of diverse views, where our actions and expressions impact others, we can begin to navigate these complexities with greater wisdom and compassion. It reminds me how the prophet said that the two smallest members of the human being, the tongue and the private parts, boast the greatest harm. So I leave you with a challenge today. Use your freedom to foster respect, build bridges, and seek understanding rather than conflict. Let us remember that art, speech, and even controversy have the power not only to divide us, but also to heal and bring us closer. And in closing, I'm going to ask you to forgive me. I like to respect your time and hold the class part to 1 hour and then the questions. I wanted to share with you a fatwa that I found from Sheikh bin Baz. And it began by saying, what is the ruling on those cartoons that we see in newspapers and magazines that depict human beings? And the answer was this: the drawings mentioned are not allowed, he says. They represent a widespread evil which is obligatory to avoid because of the generality of the authentic ahadith proving the prohibition of pictures of any creature with a soul, be they made with a machine, by hand, or otherwise. And remember, we looked at modern day scholars who argued about photography versus artwork that is produced by a human. For these, what is recorded by Al-Bukhari in his Sahih, that Abu Juhayfa, may Allah be pleased with him, said that the Prophet ﷺ cursed the person who consumes riba, that is usury and interest, and what he eats, and he cursed the picture makers. Remember, they did not have Kodak and Canon cameras in the time of the Prophet. Picture making would not be the best translation here. There are many other confirmed hadith on this topic. Remember, I'm simply reading a fatwa from Ibn Abbas. The only exception from this prohibition is what is necessary, for Allah Almighty says in Surah Al-An'am, while He has explained to you in detail what is forbidden to you except under compulsion of necessity. We also talked about this. I ask Allah Almighty to guide us to adhere to the Sharia of our Lord, to follow the way of our Prophet ﷺ, and to be wary of whatever contradicts that way. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all teachers, the best of all things, the best to ask. In that, I want to share one more story, and I see that Dr. I.S.L.A.M has to go, that she has a clinic. She's not a veterinarian, but she did work in a veterinarian laboratory in Kissimmee, and she managed a section on animal testing on animals. And so, alhamdulillah, she sent me a message, and I wanted to share that with the class. Just in closing, I want to share another story about how deep this is. In California, where I embraced Islam, and shortly after I embraced Islam, there was a young man who moved into the community. He was completing his master's in engineering. If I remember correctly, I think it was electrical engineering. His name, and I love him dearly, was Aziz Rangamwala. He became my neighbor and very dear friend. At that time in India, it was illegal to advertise any kind of advertisement that would show the aura of a human being. Aziz had never seen a picture of a human being in underclothes. I want you to get the context of this, folks. And so he came to me in his very thick Indian accent, and he's explaining to me, oh my God, Imam, these people are running naked on the campus. I thought he was referring to someone streaking, but he was referring to his understanding. Here's a man who had never seen a picture of someone in the underwear, and here are people walking around in front of him in California in hot pants. And then I wanted, last but not least, if you could stay with me, a permanent fatwa committee said the following: photos fall into the category of unlawful pictures. This is an opinion. Perhaps they didn't delve into it with the depth that I did. Allahu A'lam. No matter what instrument is used to create them, this team came up with, they share the same ruling. They are unlawful. Also, it makes no difference What you mentioned about the photo requiring no effort, it makes no difference as all photos are unlawful regardless of the means to produce them. Modern day scholars have seen something different. This is because we buy the magazine not for the picture, but for the news and information. It is permissible to place such a magazine in a place of prayer, but by either covering the pictures or obliterating the head of the photography or the photograph, sorry. It is not permissible to put a television in the place of prayer because of the falsehood and frivolity that television signify. People took, and I remember this controversy, people took this fatwa and they refused to allow masajid at the time to put televisions up so that the women could see the imam, or even put televisions up in the general masjid so that people could see better. This is how I deem by Allah ignorance creeps in, and how division creeps in, and how we find erroneous understandings. This permanent committee, or this, yes, said it is not allowed to take pictures of beings that have souls, a rule that encompasses cameras and other instruments. There are other religions that also don't believe in taking pictures of animate objects with a camera because they said that it takes pictures of the soul and the aura, and this creates a problem. I wish that I had time to actually give you examples of this. However, the scholar Ibn Abbas did say the exception to this is passport and identity photos. I'm going to conclude by looking at Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah 5, verse 2, where Allah says, do not help one another in sin and transgression. So this is where these more strict opinions come in. They're almost afraid to step out of the box and really, really examine things. And I call that paralysis. May Allah forgive me if I'm wrong. As we reflect on the intricate relationship between creation and creator, we are reminded that the essence of taswir in Islamic thought is not merely a restriction, but a profound lesson in humanity and humility. It is a reminder that while we shape, form, and express ourselves through various mediums, true creation, bringing something into existence from nothing, belongs solely to Allah, the originator of all. In a world brimming with images and representations, selfies, and everything else, it is crucial for us to remember the sacredness of creation and the dangers of crossing the boundaries set by our faith. By upholding the principles of Tawheed and avoiding any form of shirk, we honor our Creator's unique and unparalleled power. Let us leave today with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that our expressions, no matter how beautiful, must always align with the reverence and respect due to the one who creates all things. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Transcendent are you, O Allah, and praise be to you as you praise yourself. I bear witness to the fact that there is no deity except you. I seek your forgiveness and I repent to you. So I will now ask if Maysoon would turn off the